Welcome back to Fine Home Talks. I am here today with Steve Allen from Allen's Landscaping. How are you?
Doing well today. How about you?
Good. Thanks for coming on.
Absolutely.
We've known each other for a very long time.
A long time.
Long time. And you have done this for most of your life.
Yeah, over
right?
20 years I've
Yeah.
been in business now, yeah.
And you're in this area of the state,
Yep.
Litchfield, New Haven County, but you're also shoreline.
We also do the shoreline. We do Madison, Clinton area, a little bit in the Westbrook and Old Saybrook too.
Yeah. And I think what is important for people to understand is you're not just mowing lawns.
Not at all. That's
Tell
a
me
little
more.
tiny part of what we do.
Yeah, tell me more.
We do full service landscaping. So anywhere from landscape design, you have an older house with a lot of plantings that need work. We do rip out reinstalls. We do a lot of renovation work. We try and work with almost anything: hardscapes, softscapes, planting, mulch, rock, backhoe work, excavation, light excavation work, regrading, drainage projects sometimes.
I know, and that's especially right now.
Oh, right now the drainage has been a big hit. People are having a lot of water issues, water in basements, water coming into garages.
Yeah, and it affects the plants that you have in your yard. Like, it affects everything.
Absolutely.
Besides it's both inside and outside of your house, but yeah, it's impacting everybody and everything in your yard. Like even some like our dogs and things like that, like going out to use the bathroom and like play in the yard. Blue went out into the backyard at our house and instantly started ripping up the lawn. It's just so darn soft.
Oh, the yard's been really soft this year,
Yeah.
especially with the, we didn't have a hard freeze. The hard freezes come and go this year. It hasn't been consistent. We've had a lot of rain, so it's a lot of mud.
Yeah.
And if you have dogs like you and I, the dogs track the mud. They go out and play in the mud. They love it.
Love mud.
And we've had a few calls for properties that people are already concerned about their lawn, and they're concerned that they got a lot of mud holes from their dogs, and we're not quite at the point of even being able to fix it yet.
Yeah.
It's still March.
Yeah, too early.
So it's going to be an interesting season. We'll see. A couple of years ago, we had drought. Last year, we had rain constantly. Felt like it rained, I think it was something like 17 out of 20 summer weekends. It rained.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing, too, to keep up with, like the maintenance of the lawns and whatever, like landscape, if you're managing it.
Yeah,
right?
Just the pruning, the mowing, just weeding. Simply weeding. We had a ton of weeds last year because of all the rain.
Yeah. And that's, I think, too, for people who don't really understand, because I think this is one of the terms that is like easily misunderstood. Like the term landscaper is easily like, people don't get it.
No.
They really don't. And that's why I wanted you to like actually start listing what you do, because it's not just cutting grass.
No, a lot of people just think you're a guy in a truck who cuts lawns.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a little tiny part of what we actually do.
Yeah.
We do the whole service. We do basically anything in your yard, outside of your house, we encompass.
That needs to be taken
care of. Old shrubs, new shrubs. I have a degree in horticulture, so I have a fair amount of knowledge about what to do in your yard.
Yeah, and I think that's important too when we're thinking about like invasive species, things that people don't, and I'm one of those people that I've learned over time, but I didn't really ever naturally understand like what's dead, what's alive, what's, like what do you pull, what's a weed, what's not a weed. In the winter, a lot of things look like they're dead and they should just be gone. And clearly, for people like myself, it's an education piece, especially if you're buying a house for the first time. People have like no idea. I sold a house in, is it Barkhamsted? I think it was. There was gardens, Steve. I actually should have taken pictures and sent them to you. They were like award winning. And the person that had sold it said, you should have seen it in my prime, like 10 years prior. But the work,
it takes
a full-time job.
It takes a full-time crew on a large property. It takes a lot of maintenance to take care of. And a lot of people that are buying properties don't realize that.
No, they have no idea. And never mind the amount of times that they need to cut the grass just to keep up with that.
Yep.
They really don't understand. No. And Dave and I try to talk to people all the time. And like, that's what this whole thing is about, is like education of, especially a first-time home buyer, because you don't know how much time you need to put into the inside, just upkeep and maintenance, let alone the cleaning and the vacuuming and all the fun stuff of, normal everyday life, but the outside too.
Yep. No, it's crazy how much work a yard and a well-landscaped yard takes to maintain. And
it's an art. It's an art form that, that people, when you meet with people, you're going to talk to them like, what are you looking for, right? Like,
right. What do they want? What can we do for them?
Yeah.
How can we make their yard better? How can we make their yard more efficient? Sometimes it comes down to efficiency. They want the yard and they want to have the plants, but they don't know what to do about any of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So the education piece.
The education part.
Yeah.
I had a property that we did some work on a few years ago, and I just saw a post. Somebody was looking for some work done on it. They hadn't mulched it in 3 years. And they were like, it's got a ton of weeds because there was no fabric underneath the mulch. And it's like, no, we don't put fabric under mulch, but you have to maintain the mulch.
Yeah. Yeah. And education about that too. Like, have you gotten into, is there a demand or your clients, have you, not that gotten there isn't the right phrase, but is there a high demand of the people that you're working with directly about more the natural, organic, taking care of the earth and bees and, being more mindful about that?
There is a lot more push towards that now.
Yeah.
And, it's an interesting topic, and it's definitely something I've gotten more into paying attention to.
Yeah.
Some people are still against it, and they want the pesticides, the herbicides. They want to just conquer nature. And other people are very nature conscious, and they really want to take care of the world and make it a better place.
Yeah.
And it can definitely, we should be taking care of our world.
Yeah. And I see signs in certain communities. What comes to mind is like in the Simsbury, Avon area. And I think there's houses all over the state and of course the country that are doing this individually, but they have like little signs like be friendly and, like we're not, we're planting, it's the opposite of it. I can't think of the word.
Native species.
Native species.
Stuff. Yep.
Yeah. To help the butterflies and the bees. And, what if, like, could you give some small suggestions if somebody wants to think about that, like where they could start thinking or how they can, if they're the Roundup and want to stop doing that? Is there something, I know it's a blanketed suggestion besides calling you for like a full, consultation, but in terms of like something to think about or a suggestion that you might have?
I mean, there's a lot of organic products out there. There's a lot more earth-friendly stuff. There's fertilizers that are organic-based, weed killers that are even better than using Roundup. Vinegar is one that comes to mind that a lot of people are using vinegar now. Works well. Some people are even using a torch, burning the weeds instead of, and there's no real harm to that. It doesn't harm anything.
Spoiler alert. I need to not have I don't think my dad watches this anyway, but I want to buy him one of those because it's something that's been on my list. It's a really good idea.
Just to burn the weeds.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cool concept.
Kind of cool
it's
thing.
A cool concept.
Yeah.
It's easy. I mean, don't light your house on fire.
Yeah,
Your
well,
property, you got to be
clearly.
careful,
Yeah,
obviously.
Be
but,
cautious.
There are different options out there, like
Yeah.
the vinegars. There's salt solutions that people are using.
Yeah, and introducing plants too that aren't like
Right.
that are supposed to be here, right? Like native plants and grasses and things like that. Like
Absolutely.
yeah, that you and there is a movement too, and I'm not sure if you're working with anybody directly who that are like foregoing lawns.
Yeah, lawns really, they're monoculture. They're really not the most eco-friendly thing.
Yeah.
They're just not.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of work and a lot of water and a lot of fertilizer to keep that monoculture going.
Yeah.
Versus a well-developed landscape that has bigger beds and bigger native species, and it's honestly better for the planet. It's better for the I mean, we all like grass. We like to be able to go walk on it.
The look of it, and yeah.
But definitely reducing grass areas where you don't need it.
Yeah.
Where, utility-wise, it's not doing anything for you.
Because Dave and I were even looking at like clover. There's like ground covers and things like that that look great.
Yep.
And the bees love them and things like that. And they're, like I think some people have the idea, which is completely misinformation because they're not fully educated about it. If you let your grass go, it's going to look because you haven't quote unquote done it correctly. Like you don't just let the grass, it's a whole
takes a lot
science.
of
And if you decide to transfer over, bringing somebody like yourself in to help aid in that transfer and make it like it will look great. Like it doesn't have to look like garbage. I think that's what I'm trying. Right. Like if people decide to embrace a little bit more.
Yeah, you could simply just make your lawn smaller, your landscape beds bigger, put in more native species, work with nature instead of against it. Sometimes we fight nature to stay in that monoculture of perfect grass, which it's gorgeous. It's that New England, everybody likes it.
Right, I know.
And it does look good. But there's even ways to do grass but have it healthier.
Right.
Put less,
a lot of the this varieties of grass, right, that we're using aren't even supposed to be here.
Right.
So if you go to the places that you're buying grass seed versus the big box stores, the quality has got to be.
We buy our grass seed local in Connecticut from Winding Brook Turf. We use their seed.
And that's got to make a world of difference too.
Yeah.
Because
it's local. They're growing it here. They're developing it for here versus buying it from Home Depot. That nothing against them, but they're selling seed that could not even be remotely local.
Right. And it could be a lot of filler too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. What suggestions, if somebody's buying a house for the first time or upgrading, what suggestions besides calling you would you have them do as a first step if they want to try to tackle it?
Assess what you have. A lot of people don't assess what they have. Take a look at it throughout the season. Don't just go in and start ripping everything out. You might have gorgeous perennials that you don't even know are there.
Yeah. Yeah. And with technology, I'm not going to say
your
super.
phone, you could take a picture, your phone will find it.
That's what I'm saying.
It's crazy. There's apps for everything.
Yeah. And it's funny. I was on a trip with a group of women, our business group. And I was talking about, we were swimming and I'm like, there's this cool bird. And she's like, there's an app for that. You could find what the bird is by just recording its call. And I'm like, of course there is. I didn't even think of that.
It's wild.
But we think we don't really utilize technology to help us. So if you don't know what the plant is, or you think it's a plant, or you don't know if, like me, you don't know if it's a weed or a plant, take a picture.
Yep.
Yeah.
And especially now, people are looking at their hydrangeas. And if you don't know what you're doing, if you cut all the hydrangeas down, you might kill the buds. You might have killed the plant.
Right.
Or it might come back, but it might take 2 years before it does what it's supposed to do. And then you're like, oh, my hydrangea never bloomed. Well, you cut all the buds off.
Yeah.
the amount of people I've had to tell that to,
Yeah.
like, yeah, you did that to your own plant.
Yeah, like, that's not my
Right,
fault.
yeah,
But
not my fault.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially on the shoreline, right? Aren't like people, or is it just everywhere in Connecticut?
It's
People
everywhere.
yeah.
There's people, and people try and do their own thing, and they try and work in their own gardens, and it's great. But
Yeah.
just assess what you have before you just go
whacking
hog
things
wild,
out.
because you might have valuable stuff
Yeah.
that you don't even know. You
Right.
bought a house, you don't know what's there.
Right. Yeah. And then if you do want to rip stuff out, trying to be more mindful, because I assume people can call you and it doesn't necessarily, like, you have to have different services. So like you might charge one thing to go and like help people to do a plan, for example, and then like give them different options of install and that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have people just call us. We come out, we talk to them, we figure out what they're looking to do. We might do the rip out for them and bring in a machine and dig everything out and kind of give them an idea where to go, but they're going to put it in themselves.
Right.
Because they feel confident about that part of the job.
Right.
And
Right.
I mean, I've even gone as far as designing it, drawing it all up, labeling where everything's going to go for people, and then dropping the plants off, selling them the plants, the mulch, and all the stuff, and they just save on the
Okay.
labor by putting it in themselves.
Right. Yeah.
We're open to all options, kind of.
Yeah. What is your favorite part about, like, if you were to take your ideal day, what would be the most thing, like, what would you be doing the most?
Renovating properties, renovating
Okay.
landscapes, taking out stuff that's tired or weeds, and then making it gorgeous again.
Yeah.
That's kind of the most rewarding.
I was going to say very satisfying, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
sometimes you can save old plants, sometimes you can't. Sometimes, but that's probably my favorite part is like
Yeah.
a renovation of a property.
I think that's really, really cool. And in terms of like so the assessment, in terms of what do you think people make mistakes besides going hog wild and like just starting ripping the things out of their lawns or their, gardens or whatever? What other mistakes do people make, like mowing or mulching, for example?
We see the typical mulch volcanoes where they've
Oh.
mulched 6 inches up the trunk of a tree.
Yeah,
Really
I
not
learned
good
this on
for
this
it.
old house. That's what I learned. That's how I learned how to mulch is
Yep.
by watching that show. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a really common, we get to
So
a
you have to
property.
leave space, right? That's what you're referring to. Make it even.
Yeah, you want it even
Yeah.
and smooth, but you don't want to keep creeping up the trunk and covering it with mulch.
The
And
poor
that's
tree.
a lot of people do. And they
Yeah.
kill the crown of it. And sometimes the other thing that we find on a lot of properties is people will leave ropes around trees. They'll leave
Oh.
and I'll find a girdled rope and it will have killed a tree. That's a pretty
Oh.
common process that people miss, landscapers or homeowners or whoever it may be.
Like at the base of it, you
Yep,
mean?
at the base where if you
Oh.
bought a B&B tree, a bald and burlap tree, and you put it in,
Okay.
say, 5-10 years ago,
Yeah.
there's 2 different kinds of twine they use. One is biodegradable, it'll rot away. The other is your typical
Oh.
nylon twine. If it was nylon and you didn't cut it off, now 5 years later, that tree dies.
That's a hot tip.
That's a pretty
I
common.
didn't know that. I just learned something new.
Yeah, that
Oh,
one,
that's
I've
a
seen
great
that
one.
quite a few times.
Wow. Huh. Who knew?
That's, yeah. Well,
Yeah. Interesting. What about picking mulch? I feel like could be a hot mess sometimes. Is there qualities to mulch? Is there things to like think about or no? Just get the cheapest and it doesn't matter.
No, the cheapest isn't necessarily the best. You want a mulch that has nice color. Cedar is really nice, but we don't sell a ton of cedar. We do typically sell dyed. Brown and black are our most common.
Yeah.
We've been using the same company for almost 20 years.
Okay.
As a wholesaler for our mulch. I've developed a really good relationship with them. Their product is good. It's stable over the years.
Yeah, and I think too, like if you get the cheap stuff, what could go wrong with that?
Some mulch will have spores in it, and
Yeah.
they will cause a fungus on your house, on your foundation. That's one issue you see with mulch.
Yep.
The other issue is that if you buy the cheapest mulch out there, it probably either wasn't dyed or wasn't aged properly, and it's just gonna look faded. Sometimes days after you put it down.
Days, and you can really see it.
Oh yeah,
and
absolutely.
I never knew it until you can spot it, and
Yeah.
you're like, I just saw so and so doing this, literally.
Yep.
Like 4 days ago.
Yeah.
And it looks like garbage.
And it looks gray. It looks like there's no
Yes.
color to it.
Yes, and that's the reason.
Yeah. They bought a cheap product, either wasn't made properly, wasn't dyed whatsoever, or the dye was not done right.
Right.
The dyes are all natural. They're kind of like a food coloring.
Okay.
They're like a food coloring type of product.
I've always wondered about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. That makes me feel better.
Yeah, no, we've talked to
honest.
because I've had that question too. So
Yeah.
I talked to the wholesaler and said, no, it's like using food coloring.
Okay.
So
But
I'd
the
rather
nice stuff holds its color.
it holds
will
its
look
color.
Beautiful.
It looks nice.
Yeah.
The consistency is nice. You don't get huge chunks. It's a good mix.
Yeah. The uniformity.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
nice and uniform.
Yeah.
It rakes out nicely versus the bags you buy at Home Depot. Some of that stuff is big, chunky stuff. You get a mix.
Right. It's similar to other professions. That same thing with like mowers. If people are buying their own, you don't always get what you pay for, but
Sometimes you do.
sometimes
Yeah.
you do. Sometimes you do.
We run primarily Skag lawnmowers. They're I would say one of the best.
Yeah.
They give a nice cut.
Yeah.
You keep your blades sharp. You sharpen your blades regularly. Same thing. If you buy the cheapest one out there, it may do the trick,
Right.
but it
Right.
might not last as long or look as great.
Yep. Yeah, the longevity and making sure that it kind of runs not only for the season but runs well.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a difference.
Fun thing about longevity, the first mower I ever started with, I still have the engine on one of our mowers.
Really?
It's running on our truck. Yeah.
Whoa.
It's still running regularly.
That's
You know,
like
it's
old
20
like furnaces and
Yeah.
stuff. Like they don't make them like that anymore.
No,
so
it's over
like,
20 years
just
old,
let
and
it do its thing.
it's
Yeah.
still running.
That's
still
awesome.
working.
That's so cool. Well, Dave pulled our mower. It's like, well, I shouldn't no business talking about it. 0%. I could have Dave tell you what it is, but it was pulled from like years ago. Somebody was giving it away, and it's the older. Like we just got it nice tuned up. The only thing that went on it was like the little pull
The
handle.
recoil?
Like
Yep.
that was it. And then now I got the blade sharp, and I love doing it. It's so much. I love mowing with like and then like turning, because
Yep.
it's not the ride behind, it's walk behind.
Okay.
But I'll show you a picture. It's phenomenal. But the difference when it's like all tuned up and nicely,
Oh, yeah.
the
Sharp
blades are sharp.
blades, yep.
Oh, like I'm so excited.
Sharp blades cut well.
It's phenomenal. All right, so we've covered mulch. Oh, don't put the mulch against the tree.
Yeah.
What else? And then, so no mulch volcanoes.
No mulch volcanoes.
Don't buy the cheapest stuff
Yep.
that you can find.
No weed fabric under the mulch either.
Ooh, why?
Mulch biodegrades. So
Okay.
if you put the weed fabric, it might look good for a year, but then the weeds are just going to grow in the rotting mulch. It's actually counterproductive. You want to let the mulch basically rot into your soil layer, and it makes your soil healthier. That's the whole point of it. You just want to keep a fresh layer. You don't want to keep a piece of fabric in between it.
Yeah. So 80 to 90% of the people are doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
pretty much.
Pretty much.
That's
it's a
what we're
pretty
here
common
for.
misconception.
I love it. What else? What else in the outside in your world do you see and you're like, oh, okay, well, here we are. Like what other missteps do people do or not do? Or you can't really think of one now.
Missteps that people do.
I know. Well, because the interesting one for me is to learn about like the spores in the mulch.
In the
Like
mulch.
when you know,
Yeah.
like who would
Yeah, the
would really
artillery
think about
fungus,
that?
literally, it'll shoot, like, you'll have, say this wall, 8 feet up this wall, you'll have spores if the mulch has the artillery fungus in
It's
it.
crazy.
Yeah, it'll be little black dots all over your house.
And it's lovely.
It's kind of common, but
Yeah,
it's a problem.
it is a problem. And yeah, so what about planting trees and like thinking about what people do? Is there a tree that you can't stand that you're like, I don't understand why people are picking this thing, or a plant? Or
Planting trees, actually, that's a funny topic because a lot of people plant the tree with the thought if it says mini, it's going to stay tiny.
Oh,
You have to read the label or research what you're planting.
why?
A
Is
mini
it, if it's
tree-
mini is not always small?
I mean, it might be smaller than its parent product, which might have been, say, 40 feet. Now the mini is 20 feet.
That's a
But they're
good
not thinking
call.
of it.
That's a good call.
You have to really research what you're putting
Yeah,
in. Because
that's a good
just
call.
because it says dwarf or mini or
Right.
doesn't mean it's going to stay tiny.
Right.
And people do that all the time. They buy things and they never read
They
the
don't
label.
Pay attention.
It's on
Yeah.
the label. Or if you can't find the label, look it up.
You could Google it.
Google it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a big one that kind of bothers me when you see landscapes and you're like, man, that looks great now, but it's gonna look
It's gonna
look overgrown in like 5 years.
Right. Right. Yeah. And being thoughtful and mindful
Yeah.
of that. Yeah.
I tend to try and plan a landscape out so that it's gonna be good for at least 10 to 15 years without needing any major maintenance or major pruning or remediation.
Right.
10 to 15 years, I feel like, is a good number because it's a lot of people are only in a house that long.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
they're going to want to do something different after 10 to 15 years.
Yeah. I think that's completely fair. And you can completely tell, especially when I go through and I'm like about to list a property and I'm like, here's your checklist for inside and here it is for outside. Because sometimes it's just as bad.
Yep.
And I don't, I'm in the minority. I don't Photoshop my
Your pictures.
I don't like that. That's just not who a lot of realtors do. I do not. But what I say to people is that I don't care what the season. I need it to look good now. We're
Right.
listing it now, So whether that means cutting something back, cutting something down,
Yep.
getting rid of limbs, getting rid of some like ivy, and that could go south. Ivy could be a
it could be a
hazard.
mess.
It could be a big mess.
Yep.
Not only for your home, like just literally like encourage mold growth.
Oh, yeah.
Encourage termites and vermin and other pests coming in. But a lot of mold tends to happen with ivy.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
anything that grows against your house, I mean, is essentially attracting water to your house,
Yeah.
which is essentially going to rot things.
So that's a big thing too that I try to tell everybody about is making sure your plants
Aren't touching your house.
Yeah.
The amount of older landscapes
Yeah.
that have not been pruned back, that everything's just pushed right against the house.
And it might look good. That's the key. Like it might aesthetically still like there might be flowers blooming and it might be at real quick first glance just look bigger maybe than, you know what I mean? Like it's just healthy and large.
Yep.
But just because it looks good
Doesn't mean it's
it's
good,
right. It's good for your house. So that's a really key point. If people want to find you, where do they go?
We are on Facebook.
Yeah.
Allen's Landscaping.
Nice. And they can get your contact information there and,
Yep.
and message you or
Yep.
whatever. Cool. What's your favorite part of your house?
It's my favorite part of my house. My patio.
Is it?
Yeah.
I'm not surprised by the answer.
I
But
sit in my hot tub, out there. I got
nice.
the grills out there.
Nice.
Outdoor sink set up.
Yeah,
That's my favorite part.
The whole thing. I love it. Well, listen, thank you for coming. I really
Thank you for
appreciate
having me today. It was a fun,
it was
fun little experience.
That's so great. Yeah, and I appreciate it, and thank you, because we've used you and your company for years now, and we're very thankful for it.
Thank you for using us. Thank you for
absolutely. You're the best.
All right.
Take care.